Hello and welcome to an emergency edition of the Autosport and James Allen on F1 podcast, as we react to the news that Christian Horner has been sacked by Red Bull as team principal with immediate effect. His role will be taken by Racing Bull's team principal Laurent Mekies, who in turn will be replaced by Alan Permane, the racing director of Racing Bulls. We'll get into the background to the sacking, what role Max Verstappen and his father may have played in it, and what it means for Ferrari, who may well move now for the 51-year-old to replace Fred Vasseur, whose contract expires at the end of this season. As we are a truly global network, I'll be joined today by our correspondents Ronald Vording from the Netherlands. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, it was supposed to be after the doubleheader, basically my only day off. But you see, in F1, never days off, and this is the ultimate proof of it.
Absolutely the ultimate proof. Christian Nimmervoll joins us from Austria. How are you, Christian?
Hi, James. All good here. Pretty much an Austrian story, obviously.
Oh, yes, very much so. Alles good. And Ben Hunt, how are you, Ben?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, James. Yeah, all good. Didn't see this one coming.
Absolutely. Well, certainly not on this Wednesday morning. Ronald, we'll start with you. My understanding is that this decision was taken at board level by Red Bull, that Chelem Uvidia, the part owner of the team, the Thai part owner, along with Mark Mateschitz of the Red Bull empire, who has strongly supported Horner over recent years, regretted the decision but accepted the board's decision, and that Horner was told yesterday, Tuesday, and it appears that he didn't see it coming. So let's start with the obvious place a lot of people will go in terms of the thinking of what brought this about. My understanding is that the board have cited the reason is car performance and the fact that Christian had lost the team and the support of the team. But what are they saying in Holland? Because there was a big bust-up, wasn't there, between Max Verstappen's father on Sunday evening with Christian Horner. What's the chat in Holland today?
Yeah, which I think is how it goes. If you win, you know, still there are frustrations. There were frustrations at Red Bull for a long time already. But as long as you can at least fight for a championship, then not everyone is happy. But, you know, you can still keep it under the surface a little bit. And now when the results are not there anymore, frustrations boil over. And I think it happened already multiple times this year. I remember that I was in Bahrain where they had like a crisis meeting and everyone was extremely frustrated that evening. So to pick up on what Ben said, I did see this as one of the potential outcomes and as for sure one of the scenarios. I just did not see it happening this quickly. But two interesting elements. The Thai owners were in Austria, the Austrian Grand Prix. And if we fast forward to Silverstone on Thursday, there was some chat off the record, but even on the record, Max got asked about exactly this. So is the pressure from your camp or whoever to get rid of Christian Horner? And his answer was, those are not stories that I'm aware of. But that's quite telling because it's not saying no, it's not saying, okay, I fully support Christian, there's nothing going on here. So yeah, I think already it was clear that this was one of the potential outcomes. But I just didn't expect it to happen this quickly. I more expected this to happen later in the year or in 26, because in some way I feel it was inevitable, because you mentioned the whole political fight going on. And I think one of the key storylines why Christian survived that is that he kind of made the Thai owners believe that for 20 years, which partly is true, but he was, or one of the main guys at least, for the whole success. And that whole narrative has collapsed in 2025 with the success not being there anymore. And there's risk of the narrative collapsing even further in 26 with the engine program, potentially Max leaving the team. So, yeah, I think that's the main element of it, and just the timing of it is a bit of a shock, to be honest.
And Christian, there had been quite a lot of noise around this, quite a bit of negativity around the Red Bull team, really, for the past, well, certainly the past months, you would say. What's been you're very close, obviously, to your being in Austria. This, as you said, this is an Austrian story. What's your read on what's led us to this day?
I think that's actually quite a long story with a lot of milestones that happened there. And obviously it all started, James, last year around March, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I think everyone pretty much remembers. There was a bit of escalation going on when those rumors about Christian and his behavior towards his personal assistant first appeared. And the story was that Red Bull, the group, wanted to fire him back then already, with Oliver Mintzlaff having been overruled by the Thai owners, basically. So that was a starting point. However, ever since, I think the team towards the outside world pretty much made the impression, hey, there's people getting along with each other, not being a lot love lost between the UK Horner camp of the team and the Austrian Helmut Marko camp of the team, but still they got along. But I think what happened, and Ronald is quite right in saying that Christian kind of had the Thai owners on his side by telling them, look, yes, we've lost Rob Marshall, Adrian Newey, Jonathan Whitley, but I'm basically key for holding this team together and it being successful. And he didn't deliver on that promise, because if you take away Max Verstappen out of the equation, Red Bull would, at least that was before Silverstone, 9th in the Constructors' Championship. If you take the points of the second car and multiply them by 2. So that's where Red Bull really is. And I think even this year, very early at the London F175 launch, when there was this booing going on towards Christian and Oliver Mintzlaff was there, I was told that this was another key moment of the Red Bull senior management, thinking, hey, we've got a bigger issue with Christian than we probably thought. Because I think by the end of 24, everyone pretty much was under the impression this wasn't as big a deal as it was a couple of months before. And then obviously in the end, I think it came down to performance, and basically it was a bit of a question, is it Max or Christian remaining with the team? And I think Max, with the outstanding performances he's delivering, basically kind of won a power struggle. Probably Ronald knows better than I, it's probably not so much Max himself, rather than probably Jos and Raymond Vermeulen, the management of Max.
Yeah, at least they are the one doing, I don't know if I should call it dirty work, but they are, of course, doing the political work, as it should be, because, that's always been the case. Max should just focus on driving, and the other ones are doing the political work for him, as the same was last year. Then a lot of people said, yeah, but Jos is saying this, and Max in the media is saying something else. But that's, of course, because Max cannot always say what he thinks. But a couple of times he was asked, and he said, I'm fully in line with my dad, and of course they speak every day. So there's no question mark about that. They are exactly on the same page, even though sometimes people on the outside questioned it. So, yeah, I think what Christian mentioned is the key thing, that, and also probably something that the Thai owners realized, because if you really make it simple, then Horner was trying to make them believe, like, okay, I'm the main guy for success. But if 2025 has proved one thing, it's that Max Verstappen is the main guy for success. Of course, he still needs a competitive car, but the contrast with his teammates, I think Yuki is on 7 points now since he stepped in. It tells you everything. And of course, it's like one element is related to the other. The car is really tailored around Max's driving style. That's all true. But even he's struggling with it now. So it tells you that the material he has is just not competitive anymore. And I think that's the ultimate proof that in the end of the day, probably Max, it sounds weird, but it's probably even more important to the team than the team principal.
The other element I was going to say is talking about those departures as well. And yes, okay, you've got big figures leaving the team, but they've also gone on to do some really impressive things. If you look at the way McLaren are operating, and then what an example Jonathan Wheatley has done at Sauber, seeing Nico Hülkenberg finally get that podium after 239 times trying to get that podium. He's finally got it, and I think that's also underlined the ability of the staff that have left. That's kind of hammered home that point.
Yeah, and that's one thing on that they will probably never say in public, but the Verstappens feel the same way, and that's the same with Adrian Newey, but that's especially the same with Rob Marshall that Ben mentioned. I remember one Dutch media session with Max this year. I'm not sure which race it was, but then I asked him about Rob Marshall, him making the difference, and he said, well, I think that's pretty clear. So that tells you everything, that Max really thinks that Rob Marshall is the key guy in McLaren's success, and is a massive loss to Red Bull Racing. If you talk off the record to people, they also, at Red Bull, they sometimes call Rob Marshall the king of flexi wings, so that is also quite telling. And of course, McLaren's success is much more than flexi wings. But yeah, the technical department, even though Pierre Waché is still there and a lot of talented people are still there, it has taken a massive hit, and I think the Verstappen family realizes that.
But it's all about teamwork, isn't it? At the end of the day, to succeed in Formula One, and McLaren at the moment are a perfect example of it. You had Mercedes a few years ago. Before that, the Todd Schumacher era of Ferrari. Everybody pulling in the same direction. That's what's absolutely essential. And the fault lines and the cracks have been visible in Red Bull now for about 18 months. As you said, Christian, some losses. Adrian Newey, we mentioned Rob Marshall earlier on, Jonathan Wheatley, Will Courtney as well, the guy who was one of the two key people that called the race strategies, which have always been a superpower of Red Bull Racing. He announced he was leaving. He'll be joining McLaren in a little while. The result, as you say, Max Verstappen has only won 2 races this year, and that quite rightly is a miracle, like you say, Christian. 69 points he lies behind Oscar Piastri as we reach the halfway stage in this Formula One Championship. So he'd have to win 3 Grand Prix with Piastri not scoring any points in order to get back on level terms, and only 7 points coming from that second car, with Liam Lawson earlier on replaced after just a few races by Yuki Tsunoda. So we feel then, do we, guys, that this makes it more likely that Verstappen will stay for 2026, because there's been a lot of noise around the potential of him going to Mercedes. Let's address that first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the consequences for the team and also the consequences for Horner. Who wants to go first on Verstappen being more likely to stay for 26?
I think it makes sense, doesn't it? For if this is a power play via the Verstappen camp, as we believe it may well be, and has been sort of pushed from 18 months ago, then it would appear that Red Bull have now done everything to facilitate that. Keeping Max in that car, and it obviously comes off the back of Toto Wolff flirting with the idea of signing Max and talking again openly about it, despite having 2 very good drivers on the books at the moment. For me, it would make sense now for Max to stay. I don't know what you guys think, but yes, for me, it would make sense.
Well, there are two elements, basically. One thing is, Max always said it would be a great story if I finish my Formula One career in one team. And what you need to do that is you need to feel comfortable in the team and comfortable with the people around you. So it's clear that Red Bull is now doing everything they can to exactly facilitate that and to create that environment for him. So from that perspective, I say yes. And the second element why I would say yes is because, of course, with Max basically being your main guy, this is something they have discussed in length with him and with Jos and Vermeulen before announcing anything. So, of course, he's been part of this process, I would imagine. So that's all a yes, but still a big question mark I have is how competitive Red Bull will be in 26. And those questions are not solved by replacing a team principal. And I still have my doubts about the powertrains project. Still, the technical team, maybe you can revamp it a little bit, but you will not improve it overnight. So also the technical team still has to show that they are able to improve the situation and to turn it around. And that's also something they haven't done. So I think from a political point of view, I would say yes, and maybe there's even no other option given this move. But from a competitive point of view, I'm still a little bit worried for 26, to be honest.
I think maybe I can add something to what Ronald said before about Max being evasive on the Christian Horner question come Thursday in Silverstone, because it's very telling that Max, whenever he was pressed on Christian Horner, he was evasive and vague, but whenever he got questions regarding Helmut Marko, he was pretty clear and on the spot. So I think that's quite telling to where Max was in this whole discussion, and that it was actually a power game, although he didn't publicly commit to being involved in it. And in terms of 2026, I would think the chances are quite high, if not probably already done by this announcement today that he's going to stay, because Max is in a very difficult position in terms of choosing where he's going to be most successful in the future. Everyone's talking like the Mercedes power unit is going to be super powerful, and I think most of it is based on 2014 when they dominated F1 for years. But even Toto Wolff or Adrian Newey at Aston Martin, no one can give him a guarantee on 26. So changing teams would involve risk for Max as well, although probably chances that Red Bull Powertrains builds an engine or a power unit that is immediately competitive, it's unlikely. I mean, hats off to Red Bull if they can do it, but that's a huge project. So no one can promise him success next year. So if I was Max, what I would do is stay 26, because I think, as Ronald indicated, he is a very loyal person, and he basically, in a perfect world, would want to stay at Red Bull and finish his career there. Like he said at Abu Dhabi in 2021, let's do this for another 10 to 15 years, obviously in a rush of emotion. But I actually think that's what he's feeling, that Max is very openly speaking about he wants to do something else in life other than Formula One. Like he did the Nürburgring test recently in a Ferrari by the Emil Frey Racing team in Germany. So with a brand like Red Bull, he can pretty much, select every car and brand he wants for whatever he's doing in GT or in other racing activities. So he has a lot of freedom there, whereas it's totally unimaginable if he signs a $150 million a year deal with Mercedes that he drives a Ferrari in a Nürburgring event, for example. That's never going to happen. So I think Red Bull is also giving him more freedom. And I think that was also a condition of Max in the talks that have been going on in the last weeks.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right about that. They give him a lot more freedom. He doesn't have to do as many promotional activities as he would have to do if he jumped teams. And for sure, if I was advising Max Verstappen right now, I would say, for the reasons you've just said, from the loyalty point of view, and also having been a protagonist in this story, you have to stay for next year, also to survey the competitive landscape, because he's in such a strong position. He's demonstrated this season that he is, by some margin, the best driver in Formula One. His qualifying lap at Silverstone up against the McLarens was absolutely extraordinary. It was superhuman, and pretty much he's done that throughout the season. He can then survey the landscape, because it may well be that an Adrian Newey designed Honda-powered Aston Martin shows the signs he'd be looking for in 26. Alonso's at the end of his contract. He could go there, or he could go to Mercedes. And why would you not do that if you're holding all the cards as Max Verstappen is? So let's turn the page slightly then and look at the changes than what's going to mean for Red Bull Racing, because in comes Laurent Mekies, who's the current team principal of Racing Bulls, an experienced guy. Previously was at Ferrari as the sporting director. He was at Faenza previously as an engineer, and in between times he spent time at the FIA, where he was actually the understudy to Charlie Whiting. And the original idea was that when Charlie retired, that he would take over half of Charlie's role, which would be the race operations, the race director side of things. With Marcin Budkowski taking over the technical part of what Charlie did. Of course, then, unfortunately, both of them left, and then, unfortunately, Charlie Whiting passed away. So, a very experienced guy, Laurent Mekies, obviously much younger. But how do we see Red Bull Racing under him? I guess a continuity candidate as far as the Red Bull group are concerned. But what do we think about his strengths, Ben?
Yeah, I thought that was a bit of a surprise to see him be put into that role. I can see him. I thought it made sense to move him across to become team principal, but to obviously be in that CEO role of the team, that struck me as a bit of a strange choice. I had presumed, like many of us, we'd sort of anticipated this coming, but I thought that Horner would have been moved into some sort of director role of the team, which would allow for someone like Mekies to come in and run the team on the day-to-day best business. So to see him now parachute into that bit at the top is quite an interesting one, because will that mean that he's overseeing both teams? Will that mean that he's able to do that, and focus on obviously rebuilding? I think for me now that is the biggest thing. It's the whole rebuilding process and sort of installing a culture. And I'm not sure I've seen much evidence of that at Racing Bulls during his admittedly short time there. I have my doubts whether he's the sort of character that is able to do that. I don't know him personally very well, but yes, he's been around and had various different roles and in different teams. But ultimately, is he going to be able to stop the erosion of culture within Red Bull, which has made it that winning machine for all these years? And is he then able to recruit and have everyone sort of believing in his project? I think that for me is going to be the biggest test And I don't necessarily know whether he does have those skills. I hope that he does prove me wrong, but at this moment in time, it just seems a bit of a strange choice to be put in at the top of the organisation. As I say, team principal role that made sense, or even moving across, GP into that role. Would make sense, race engineer, and he was obviously promoted to head of trackside operations, I think, and then obviously now it would make sense for him to become team principal and running it, as in, I guess the role of a team principal has changed now. It's kind of like the old-fashioned sporting director is now running a team, and for me that would have been much more of a logical choice. But I'm surprised by the appointment, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think Verstappen would not be too keen on promoting Gianpiero Lambiase to team principal role, because even though he missed Austria and Simon Rennie jumping in did a phenomenal job and Max was full of praise of him, I think that relationship is so special that you still need him as a race engineer. And he can combine it with being a head of racing as he is now, but you cannot combine that with being team principal. So I think not to interrupt the whole day-to-day operations too much. I think in terms of his skill set, that would make sense indeed. But I think not to disrupt the day-to-day operations of the team. This probably makes sense also because you have to do something on a really, really short notice, like short term. And interestingly, what does it mean for the position of Helmut Marko? I think that Christian can probably say a bit more about that, but he referred to Saudi Arabia last year, that basically the Horner camp tried to get rid of him. Now we are, 15, 16 months on, and the tables have turned completely. So his power position is extremely strong at the moment, I feel.
Christian?
Yeah, it's interesting because we did an interview with Helmut Marko, I think it was in March, when I asked him the question, if Max Verstappen is going to leave Red Bull Racing, is that the time for you to step into retirement? And he answered, well, yes, probably. I think that may have changed now because although they didn't admit to it in public, Christian Horner and Helmut Marko weren't on best terms, obviously. And Helmut Marko is on a contract until the end of 26, which, by the way, is the first ever contract he actually signed because it was all on handshake basis with Dietrich Mateschitz. So I think as long as Max Verstappen is going to stay in that team, Helmut Marko will stay there as well. And obviously they will probably be looking for some CEO type of person to run operations. If that can be Sebastian Vettel, like is a big discussion in the German media, I doubt it. It's certainly a possibility. But I think the current rumors in the German media are quite overblown, to be honest, because it all started with Sebastian Vettel doing an interview with Sky and, losing some friendly words. And then based on those friendly words about Helmut Marko was asked to comment on Sebastian Vettel, and he was friendly as well. So that's how those stories got a momentum. From what I know, they haven't talked in months about it. But obviously, with a restructuring going on at Red Bull Racing now, and I think that's what we're talking about, because it's not just, Christian leaving, being replaced by Laurent Mekies. I'm sure there's going to be a structural discussion as well now. And that will take some time. And I think it will take some time to hold all those talks and probably get some new people in, particularly technical people, because one thing, that's obvious, Christian Horner was not in the end hands-on responsible for like a front wing or a rear wing, and Laurent Mekies will be neither, but they will need those people to support Pierre Vacher, who's technical director, or look for a new Pierre Vacher that I don't know, but definitely there's things are going to be changing at Red Bull Racing, I'm quite sure.
Just to flip this on its head, I wonder if we would be in this situation if the Red Bull Junior Driver Program, the Academy, whichever way you want to call it, was as successful as it was in the past. If indeed you have two strong drivers in that team fighting for wins, as we've seen for many years, we obviously haven't got that at the moment, have we? We've got only one driver delivering week after week. I wonder whether indeed the failing is upon the whole program, whether had that situation be different, would Christian Horner then be facing the sack? Probably not. So it is quite interesting which way you flip the coin.
Well, to be fair, I don't think the program is that bad. If you look at, people like Hadjar performing well, Lindblad coming through. But the thing is, you've got one guy that's so good at the moment that whoever you put next to him will basically not survive. So I cannot, even if I think about other guys on the grid, I cannot think of drivers apart from the multiple world champions and the really big names, who would survive in that second Red Bull seat? So I think it's some kind of a snowball effect. And I did an analysis on this earlier this year, but you have one guy bringing in the results. So of course you're going to listen more to his feedback. You always have those stories, is the Red Bull car designed for Max? It's not necessarily, but you've got one guy delivering on track. So it's fully normal that you try to maximize that potential. But in doing so, and I actually had this conversation with Pierre Wache as well, in doing so, you of course make it more difficult for the guy next to him, and you create a car that has a really, really narrow setup window and things like that. So it's a snowball effect that it's almost impossible to get rid of unless Max would leave the team. But then Red Bull, and that's also what I would say, it goes much more beyond replacing one driver, because then the whole team needs to reinvent itself. So the whole success story is in a way also why they've become so incredibly dependent on one guy.
But it's interesting because it's comparable with the early Schumacher years at Ferrari. I mean, a lot is made of the fact that this car, this Red Bull DNA, has gone towards Max's liking and what have you. But it can't be that much to his liking because he's not been very competitive, not as competitive as he wants to be with the McLarens. This is, to me, more a case of a bit like 1996 at Ferrari, when the gap between Michael Schumacher and Eddie Irvine was quite big, because that was not a good car. And I remember talking to Eddie Irvine about this, and over those next few years, as the car improved, he got closer and closer and closer to Schumacher. There was always a small gap between them because Schumacher obviously was on a different level from Eddie, but it was just how difficult the car was. And that, to me, is a reflection, what's been going on in that team is very much a reflection of the fact that they've just produced a poor car, which at the end of the day, it appears is the kind of the official internal reason why Christian Horner has been sacked. But just to close out the kind of consequences and the domino effect within the Red Bull empire, Alan Permane will now take over as the team principal of Racing Bulls, a very experienced hand. Another former race engineer, was part of the team at Benetton and Renault when Fernando Alonso won the World Championships there. Very close to people like Pat Simmons and that whole group, and also Jonathan Wheatley. They were all part of that team that was at Enstone. And it's interesting that he and Wheatley now find themselves as team principals. The team principal meeting will be quite fun, I think. They were having, and Laurent Mekies as well. They were all in sporting director meetings a few months ago, and now they're all team principals. I think people like Ron Meadows, who's still a sporting director at Mercedes, will feel a bit left out that they've all kind of moved up. But what do we think? Ben, about Alan Permane at Racing Bulls?
It's a sensible choice. I think that I was talking about culture and sort of building a team around you. I think that he's the guy that is able to do that, to bring them together and move the team forward, which ultimately is everyone's goal. And I think that he's got the ability to do that. I think I look forward to seeing him within that role. He showed glimpses of it before when, Renault, and I remember him being at Alpine, and I think that he was sort of dealt a bit of an unfortunate hand there. So I'm glad to see him back in that capacity.
Yeah, there's one thing, if we zoom out a little bit, probably we talked about who would be the ideal team principal at Red Bull. And I think for that, probably this happened a year too late, because Jonathan Wheatley would have been the perfect Red Bull team principal. And he even wanted to, because that's the main thing. When all of this kicked off, he had ambitions to go higher up, and he had the ambition to become team principal and ideally the Red Bull team principal. But of course, it didn't happen. And Horner survived back then. So then he started to look around in the paddock and found a place at Sauber, so let's say the Audi project. But yeah, that's ironic. I mean, now there's not really a space, but let's say there's a space for him, but it's coming too late. And I think he would be a perfect guy to lead Red Bull, even though it's not going to happen.
It is a rebuilding job there, isn't it?
Yeah. But that's basically the same at Sauber. It feels really strange to compare Red Bull and Sauber, but when he came into Sauber, he also had to rebuild and to build for 26. And yeah, I wouldn't say the situation in Red Bull is that bad, but in a way it's similar. And even there are more similarities, because in Sauber and Hinwil, not all the facilities are what they should be, but the same applies to Red Bull. If you look at the wind tunnel, that's, I think, a key factor in the car being this bad this season. So that's also, the task for a new team principal is so complex. Yeah. It's about people's management. It's about drivers. You have Max, but what to do with the second seat? especially with Honda going and you still have Yuki there. So that's a complex question. Then you have the facility. So it's such a huge task, really.
I always think, back to football terms a lot, you get a new manager bounce is what they talk about it. And then you think of Komatsu at Haas, new manager comes in, there's an upturn in results. I think Ollie Oakes, when he initially arrived at Alpine, you saw they had a strong end to the year. That was a new manager bounce. Wheatley going in, that's a new manager bounce. I just wonder whether the feeling is now at Red Bull they need to flip and get that bounce and sort of obviously drive forward.
Well, to be honest, I don't think we can expect that from Mekies or Red Bull because, especially this year, development on the 25 car, they will have some upgrades in Spa, but basically nothing beyond that. So that's given up because all focus is on 26. So they have to deal with what they have. So I think 25, and that's also people will listen to this and probably think, oh, what's it going to mean on track? And my answer would be not that much because I expect Red Bull to keep struggling for the second half of the year. And probably also into 26. So it's much more about the layer that people don't see. This runs so much deeper. And as you said before, it's all about restructuring and building for a new success era, which of course will cost time. And now you need the right people to build on that new era.
So just to finish then, let's bring it back to Christian Horner. His career so far, 20 years in charge of Red Bull Racing, came in after Red Bull bought the Jaguar team from Ford Motor Company, the team that had been Stewart Grand Prix before that. He won 8 Drivers' World Championships, 6 Constructors' Championships, 124 race wins, which makes him, as a team principal of a single team, one of the very most successful in the history of the sport. 107 poles and 287 podiums. So one would look at this situation. There is no smoke without fire in Formula One. There were rumours about him being approached by Ferrari. John Elkann, who is trying to get that team to be competitive, I believe has been in touch with him previously and has sounded him out about going to Ferrari. Fred Vasseur's contract expires at the end of this year. Do you think Christian would be attracted by the idea of getting out of the UK for a bit, taking on the challenge of trying to manage Ferrari with Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc and bring something of that winning DNA from his past? Do you think he can recreate the magic? Do you think he'll want to try and recreate the magic at Ferrari? Christian, what do you think?
I mean, if he's not attracted to doing that, then what? I mean, that's obviously the biggest job that is there, or probably is there. We don't know, but obviously there's rumors going on about Fred Vasseur. But I think it's interesting because yes, we believe he has had contact with John Elkann, and there was, I don't know which race it was, but he was asked on the record on Sky if he had met with John Elkann, and he was quite evasive on that question and not saying no to it. And from what I've been told this morning, this whole Ferrari rumor, the Red Bull group, being under the impression that Christian himself was not very active in, denying those, was one of the reasons that in the end also led, in multiple reasons, but that also led to what happened today. It's not a secret that in the past, Ferrari tried to lure him away together with Adrian Newey at some point in the past. So it wouldn't be a huge surprise, I think.
And this is also ironic because you go from being under threat at Red Bull and now being removed from the role of team principal and CEO to being linked to one of the most prestigious jobs in the world of Formula One. So that's also quite ironic in a way. And to be honest, because we talk for half an hour about the problems at Red Bull, and of course it's Christian's responsibility, but we shouldn't forget his legacy, as James pointed out. And, he is a more than capable team principal. So I also think that it would be a good choice for Ferrari. The only thing is, also there it's fully about the dynamic, because we've seen when Lewis Hamilton got asked about all the rumors surrounding Vasseur that he was extremely outspoken. So he's very supportive. I think some other people in the F1 team, including both drivers, are really supportive. So again, the dynamic there will be interesting. What does the top management of Ferrari want, and do they really think Christian is the right guy for the job? And what do the people on the ground want? So that's also going to be a very interesting one. But if we zoom out a little bit, I still think Christian Horner is a really, really capable team principal in F1. And that he would be, in my opinion, he would be a good guy to lead Ferrari at some point in the future.
I agree. I think that it is a tantalising prospect to have him there. He would be someone that Lewis could work with. And obviously, he's got the experience and knowledge. I think it'd be a fascinating prospect. And who thought we'd be like 18 months down the line saying that Christian Horner and Lewis Hamilton could be the ones to deliver world championships for Ferrari? But here we go. I think the other option as well, perhaps, maybe Alpine. I think the thought of Horner relocating to Italy. I think that may prove to be something difficult. He's got his family in the UK, and he is a very hands-on manager. He's in the factory pretty much every day. Returns from races and goes straight in. He would obviously be doing the same at Ferrari, and that would mean missing the family and everything else. So maybe Alpine could be an option. I'm just going to float that as an idea. Obviously knows Briatore very well. Maybe that's an option. But he certainly would be sort of if I was looking at Ferrari, he'd be top of my list to run that team.
Well, there are
I agree with Ben about the.
Sorry, go on, Christian.
Sorry, James. I agree with Ben about the Alpine option. The only difference to the Ferrari one would be, I think, that with Alpine, probably Christian would be enticed to do it as a minority shareholder.
Shareholding, yeah.
Because, we cannot oversee the fact that Christian has quite a bit of wealth, also thanks to Red Bull, deservedly so. I mean, he delivered. So if he goes to Alpine, I think that maybe as a shareholder, because we know in the past he has had ambitions to go one step further than just team principal.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's a very good point, and especially having seen Adrian Newey go and get the shareholding at Aston Martin. And so obviously his great nemesis Toto Wolff being a significant shareholder at Mercedes, it is definitely something that I'm sure Horner would be interested in. So it doesn't look like he would be short of options. And with competitive people, there are two principal drivers. Pride is definitely one of them, and his pride will have been hurt by this for sure. And the other one is finding motivation after 20 years in the same job. Sometimes it could be difficult to find motivation, but what better motivation could he feel now than to try and go to another team and beat Red Bull Racing, who've sacked him today. Well, my thanks to Ben, to Ronald and to Christian. Stay tuned to Autosport and Motorsport channels for all the latest on this breaking story. We'll see you again soon.